kind of hope you got the point about Kevin and thinking about adolescence. And although it's quite amusing, it does kind of give us a sense that adolescence is a time of change. And in many ways, what I want you to think about is when you were an adolescent, because actually it's quite for all of us, it's quite a personal experience, and we will all experience it differently. So it won't be the same, and we won't have the same experience of being a teenager or of parenting teenagers. So when we're working with young people, it's absolutely unpredictable how this is all going to pan out, really. So we know that it's a time of change, that they're kind of physical changes and growth, and the video clip is trying to show us that there's a surge of hormones, which is kind of very, very overwhelming for young people to make sense of. There's a real increase of dopamine, which is kind of needing more pleasure seeking and reward. And risk taking is very, very, very normal at this stage. So kind of as adolescents, we will all have taken risks. There will be different risks, but we all need to do that because we're testing out the boundaries between childhood and adulthood. I love the quote that he says he is losing the power of rational thought. And he is, because there's huge changes to the brain at this time, which causes massive amount of confusion. I was talking to some social workers yesterday about a teenager around a young person who subject to child sexual exploitation, who's been horrendously neglected in her childhood, and she moved into residential care, and they were talking about the fact that she sometimes seemed to completely get it and then sometimes not. And actually they were talking about her having some sort of cognitive difficulties. In fact, I think what they're describing is the kind of brain being all over the place, and there being times when nothing makes sense as an adolescent, and you're kind of, there's just too much architecture going on. And there's no doubt that the brain is a process of pruning and integration, so you use it or lose it. We've already talked about risky behaviour and impulse control, but that really is problematic here. You saw Kevin there saying, I'm going out, in the middle of, at the end of the night, because it's hard to hold and control your impulses. You don't quite know what to do with them. It's like kind of having the sort of CD on fast forward. You can't quite stop it. Absolutely total emotional uncertainty and emotional lability, where he says it's so unfair, I hate you, and you don't know whether people love you or hate you, and the kind of sense of which your sense of emotions in the world and how people felt it about you has changed because you've changed and their relationship with you has changed. What's really, really critical is that, and we'll come to talk about a lot, is the kind of need for attachment here. So this is a critical time where all those early attachment relationships make a huge difference, which I'll talk about a bit more. Absolute huge emotional regulation problems. So how do you manage that? And he, a mother there who talks very quietly, and he's saying, don't bloody shout at me. And I can so remember that with my youngest daughter, that I always felt like I was quite emotionally regulated, but to her it didn't look like that. Reasoning is interrupted, and there is a sort of real sense of transition from childhood to adulthood. What am I? I'm not a child. I want some independence, but I don't feel ready to be an adult. And I think at this time, we absolutely know that when babies cry and they let us know that they're distressed, we kind of really, really get that. And actually, most of us, if you're in a supermarket or we're not very often in supermarkets anymore, or in the park, and a baby cries, on the whole, you feel it and you turn around and you look. That kind of help-seeking signalling makes complete sense to us. But in adolescence, that signalling for help comes in all sorts of guises. So actually, in terms of smoking, drug taking, alcohol, distress, self-harm, different sexualities, early relationships, early sexual behaviour, all of those things can be on a continuum of kind of early experimentation adaptation to signs of distress. Adolescents telling that something's going wrong for them. And one of the things I want us to pick up is to think about that the problems that adolescents have are usually a demonstration or an indication of their distress, not an indication of adolescence, and something we'll come to think about. Just to say that kind of in adolescence, the environment is the really key important part of it, kind of the world in which the adolescent lives. So adolescent actually now starts as early as age 10, and some aspects of development are not complete until around 25. And actually, interestingly, I was saying to Daria yesterday, I've got a 25-year-old daughter who, lives with her boyfriend about 10 minutes drive from here in North London, and who's got a job and doing very well. But she's finding lockdown really, really difficult, and the lack of sun and all of that. And she phoned me in an utter panic yesterday, and really wanting to come home because she's finding it so hard. She's on her own every day working. So it really made me think about, actually adolescence carries on for quite a long time. So Kevin's parents were a little over optimistic, but it's also important to think about that 10 to 13 is kind of early adolescence time, and you see a sort of dominations of hormones and sexual development, start of physical changes. So kind of you can see that this is a time of change. 13 to 15 is the sort of middle adolescence where feelings dominate and uncertainty, taking things personally, poor emotional regulation. Late adolescence is kind of a time of sort of people making sense of their kind of their emotional regulation and starting to sort of settle down. And then 20 to 25, almost there, but the brain is still developing. Hasn't formed completely. And 20 to 25-year-olds still need a lot of support, a lot of care, and a lot of independence too. It's interesting that we could say that kind of that adolescent is naturally a difficult time, a time of turbulence, and that is how it's characteristic. But actually adolescent difficulties are not inevitable. But those difficulties are influenced by a mix of the individual, so the person in front of you, their family and parental context, and the circumstances in which we live. So in trying to make sense of an adolescent's needs, we've got to think about the individual, what's their family history, and what's their kind of environmental circumstances. So pre-existing individual vulnerabilities like disabilities, neurological issues, etc., might have an impact in adolescent, might make that journey more difficult. But actually, we've always got to be cautious about thinking those individual vulnerabilities are internal characteristics of the young person, as opposed to the impact of early neglect that are kind of being seen as impact right now. The adolescence is the product of childhood experiences, and it is abuse and neglect that causes problems. So the real difficulties in adolescence, the ones that bring adolescents to our services, are caused by those early experiences of trauma, something we'll come to talk about. Parents are absolutely critical to the success of adolescence. They don't often feel like it, but it is the kind of way that they parent that will have an impact. So I'm going to come back to this, but there's 4 kinds of parenting styles. So parenting from sort of babyhood onwards, that is high on demand and high on sensitivity, is called authoritative parenting. And babies and children and adolescents who have parents or caregivers, because I use parents as a sort of shorthand for any kind of family relationships, because it can be anybody who's providing this parental care. But parenting that's high on demand and high on sensitivity produces good outcomes. So children get what they need, they get their developmental needs for attachment and care met, but they also are encouraged to have boundaries, to be empathetic to others, to think about other situation. So parenting that is high on sensitivity but low on demand, called permissive parenting, and I have to confess I fall into this category, which is perhaps why my 25-year-old phoned me yesterday, is that I'm a permissive parent. So I genuinely use this framework to try and think about being more authoritative, which is that I am sensitive to my children's needs, but I don't always make demands on them and think about building their internal locus of control. And to give you a glimpse of that, if you think about, you know, little boys in a cafe with their grandparents and they're sitting at a booth and taking up 2 tables when we used to be able to do that kind of thing, and there's a lady waiting for a seat, but because they're taking up 2 tables, the little boys haven't noticed that someone's waiting, and they're mucking about with all the food on the table, you know, the mustard and the sugar, and grinding it in, and nobody's saying anything, and they're not looking up and around and thinking, what's my responsibilities here? So that's the kind of start of permissive parenting. And in adolescence, if we don't get the kind of demand support right, really poor outcomes. For some children, they grow up in households that are very, very high on demand and low on sensitivity, so stern, harsh and punitive, called authoritarian parenting. And that is really difficult for a developing child, but it's really hard in adolescence, because adolescents need us to keep this balance between requiring things of them, so setting limits and boundaries, but providing those attachment relationships and getting them to think about themselves. And the final box is called uninvolved. I would call it neglectful parenting, and this is parenting where children get nothing, so they get no warmth, care or interest actually, but they also have no demands made on them, no boundaries enforced. And just imagine what it's like to go into adolescence having not kind of had your emotional needs filled up, but also understanding what it is to be in the world, understanding how you have to be with people and feeling empathy for others. So parenting styles is really, really important, and harsh, cruel parenting, that kind of and parenting that's focused on blame is really damaging for adolescents, something we need to keep an eye on. Again, I was talking about this child sexual exploitation case yesterday, where we had a parent who was being harsh and critical, and professionals found it really hard to work out whether they should understand that because adolescence is difficult, or whether they should be critical of it because the young person in front of them needed something different. And that's the sort of real balance that we've got to get. Context for adolescence is really, really important, and we're seeing this in lockdown. So poverty, exclusion, racism, homophobia, transphobia, all of those kind of sense of your own emerging identity and how you are perceived by others is really, really important at this time. Something we need to be talking to young people about, something we need to be talking to their parents about. And I was asked this question, to what extent are we talking about racism and all forms of discrimination in our work? In my job, I probably, read 1,000 assessment reports, child protection reports, that kind of thing a year. And the kind of issue, the issue of racism and how frequently is experienced by Black and minority ethnic communities in our society is very, very rarely discussed, very, very rarely acknowledged. So I'm encouraging people to do things like, there is a thing called a culturogram. We'll be sending these slides out, and any of the resources I talk about will also come with them. Think about, does your organisation have a culturally competent framework helping you to think about how you understand someone's cultural context, understand the issues of racism. And really, really important for me, particularly in adolescence, is thinking about racism is experienced in families' life as a threat from outside, but good quality family and parental relationships actually build really good internal structures for helping children to deal with racism, and that's a real strength. And are we recognising that enough? The same would be true for children with disabilities. Moving into adolescence is a time when they will feel very conscious of their disability, in the sense that they will be starting to see the world, see how the world is viewing them. And our job is really to help them kind of make sense of that, and to help them keep a positive view of their disabilities and all forms of discrimination. So I'm just going to show you another video, so bear with me again. So I have to stop sharing and go out again, and then go open share tray, include systems video. Oh, no. I'm sorry, forgive me. I thought I'd got this all. Here we go.
Brain development.
Daria, can you just confirm you can see this? Or people tell me if not, you just have to.
Hi, we can see it, but we can't hear it.
Thank you. Let me go out and come back in again.
There are subtitles.
Brain development is much more than a story about biology. From the earliest years, relationships with others play a key role in shaping how our brain grows and develops. Early relationships, where there is abuse and neglect, have a long-term impact on children. A brain that has adapted to survive in a threatening or unpredictable world may not work so well in an ordinary environment. This can create what is called latent vulnerability, where early abusive or neglectful experiences with carers put children at greater risk of experiencing mental health problems in the future. For these children, compared to their peers, common experiences like moving to a new school can feel more daunting and stressful. New faces can appear threatening, while positive social cues can be missed. It can be harder to negotiate new social situations and learn to trust new people. Even fun experiences like joining a new sports team can be challenging. Too much focus on potential threat cues can mean missing out on positive social cues such as a playful nudge. Or it causes an overreaction, which leads to an increased risk of conflict and sometimes violence. These reactions can increase the likelihood of generating new stressful events. It's harder to deal with everyday challenges when you feel unconfident and anxious inside. and harder to build and maintain relationships. Over time, this can mean a child loses friends and the support of adults, and so misses out on opportunities to grow and develop. This social thinning can increase the risk of mental health problems in the future. Neuroscience research is beginning to shed new light on how vulnerability unfolds over a child's life. All children need care and stimulation from adults who value them and who show them attention and love. These experiences shape a child's brain development. When children face traumatic experiences like abuse and neglect, their brain adapts to help them cope. We know of changes in 3 different brain systems: the reward, memory, and threat systems. Experiences of domestic violence or physical abuse can lead to hypervigilance, where the brain reacts more to threat. This might help a child stay safe in an early adverse environment, but it can cause problems in more ordinary environments. Hypervigilance can best be understood as a pattern of adaptation rather than a sign of damage. Abuse and neglect can also mean a world where a child's basic needs for care and attention are not met. This can shape the brain's reward system, the part of the brain that helps us learn about positive aspects of our environment and motivates our behaviour. Over time, the brain's reward system can learn to respond differently to things like positive social cues. Neuroscience studies have also pointed to changes in the autobiographical memory system, our memory of everyday past experiences. Following trauma, negative memories appear to become more salient, which means they become more prominent than positive ones. And everyday memories can also become less detailed. This is a problem because we need to draw on past experiences to help us deal with new social situations. Neuroscience research is showing how childhood trauma can create latent vulnerability, increasing the risk of later mental health problems like anxiety and depression. This vulnerability is not just located in the child, but arises through their relationships. Helping children who have experienced trauma still requires ordinary boundaries and consequences, but it also requires us to step back and reflect and see behaviour that we find challenging in a different light. A child may simply be doing their best to survive now, with brain adaptations from the past. We know a child's brain has the capacity to continue to adapt. For this to happen, they need our help to build and maintain trusted relationships, manage everyday stresses, and prevent new ones from happening. We need to encourage them to try again and believe things can be different. This is far from an easy task and takes time. Science is helping reframe our understanding of childhood trauma. Seeing children's behaviour in a new light can mean we respond differently. But there is much still to learn. Working together, we can develop more effective approaches that promote resilience and recovery. We can help children build trusting relationships and create opportunities for their brains to adapt in new ways.
Sorry, it's not easy moving between these transitions, is it? And it's really weird because I can't see anybody as well, so forgive me. So it's really that video is really powerful, and I'd really recommend people looking at the UK Trauma Council website because there's quite a lot of other resources there. And I think the really important things that I want you to take from that video is that the whole point is about that it's a pattern of adaptation rather than a sign of damage. So children's responses to difficult situations come from their kind of tried and tested strategies in the past, strategies that made sense to them at the time, but are not do not make sense to others in different situations. And just to give you an example of that is that I did a serious case review about 3 years ago for a young woman who, in her sort of 15 and running away and all of that, and she'd been adopted when she was 9. And she'd lived in very, very, very neglectful circumstances. Her brother had been seriously harmed, and she'd moved to live with her grandmother. And the way of surviving was that they had very little money. Her grandmother used to get her to go shoplifting from the age of 5. And the way to kind of keep going, that shoplifting became an adaptation, a way to survive, but also a kind of part of family life. And it's really not surprising that she took that with her. So think about what's young people, adolescents' behaviour. What's the adaptation that it means? What's the meaning of the behaviour? What's being communicated here is really important to understand. The other thing I want us to notice is this whole concept of social thinning. And actually, I started with Emma this morning, the young woman who took her own life, and she's a real story of social thinning to the point where she had nobody left. So how are we keeping connections going for the children and young people that we work with? And then the final thing I wanted to pick up from the video was that the phrase, not just in the child, but through their relationships, that kind of trauma is experienced through relationships, and recovery has to be experienced through relationships. So kind of relationships play a central role in adolescence. And when a child is terrified, abused or ignored by their caregiver, as you've just seen, they develop an internal model of relationships that basically tells them, I'm rubbish, I don't matter, I'm unlovable. And they're very, very likely to develop a disorganized attachment, do not know whether love or hate, and there's no reliability. So this can kind of lead, if you have that total unpredictability growing up from your main caregivers, you don't get your needs met, your help-seeking behaviour is not reinforced. It makes meeting other adults very, very, very confusing, because you don't know who to trust, who's going to be supportive, and people can be frightening, perplexing and best avoided. And quite often that leads to you rejecting or sabotaging new relationships. Really, really difficult. Again, I was talking about this serious case review yesterday where this young woman who was being sexually exploited had been moved to supported lodgings with a kind of foster carer, and it had been a really, really good plan. And within 2 days, she'd brought her boyfriend home, who was homeless, but who happened also to be wanted by the police. And the supported lodging carer felt she had to give her notice, and somehow Megan wanted this to work, but she also wanted to sabotage it. So think about the role of relationships with adolescents, and actually that we as professionals, adolescents don't automatically trust us, and they may have been encouraged not to trust us by previous relationships. So we know that from the triennial review of serious case reviews that adolescents are in these circumstances where they've been previously harmed, where they have difficult relationships, where things haven't gone well for them, that they are very, very vulnerable, and we're seeing all sorts of harm. So 31% of case reviews involve children aged 11 or over. So serious case reviews happen when a child has been harmed or sometimes dies, and we think of often as babies for serious case reviews, but quite, as you can see, a third are around vulnerable adolescents, and that's growing. And what the kind of triennial review, which looked at all the kind of serious case reviews that happened in a 3-year period, highlighted was these things. First of all, going missing. We know that it's kind of obvious that going missing was a sign that other problem in an adolescent's life which required a safeguarding response. But understanding the missing episodes is really, really critical. So I think we've got very, very good, those of you working with adolescents, at doing coming home interviews, trying to understand each incident, but really, really important that we start to develop a sense of a pattern and what they mean, and that kind of what's the pattern of adaptation here, what's the communication that's here. We know that there's a huge growing concern about criminal exploitation, which is moving drugs, violence, gangs, sexual exploitation, trafficking, radicalisation, gang membership, all of that. These all need to be understood in the context of attachments and relationships, and young people looking to belong, looking for emotional certainty, looking for some validation. And those needs are being sadly exploited significantly for young people. We know that adolescents have been exploited, are vulnerable to, and often experience multiple forms of abuse. So sexual abuse, physical abuse, and there's a really, really strong connection between neglect in childhood, physical abuse in childhood, and witnessing domestic violence in childhood. Really, really important that we don't underestimate that. I'm doing lots of reviews where I see those three things coming together. So physical abuse, domestic violence, and neglect, emotional neglect particularly, and actually adolescents who are out of their own control. I was going to say out of control. What I mean is that they cannot control their emotions, are often not controlling them through anger and violence. But it's not surprising that if you've grown up in a situation where violence is indicated to be the way you solve problems through domestic violence or physical violence to you, then in adolescence that would become just another adaptation. I'll kind of say it here, but I'm really encouraging us to stop using the word physical chastisement or reasonable physical chastisement. Hitting children is wrong. Hitting adolescents is wrong. It's harmful. It doesn't work. It doesn't help them understand how to do things differently, and it creates a pattern of adaptation, which is unhelpful going into adulthood. And I'm afraid we've done far too many serious case reviews now not to know that that's the truth. So challenging the hitting of children, and I know there's a legal framework that makes that quite complicated, but as a professional group who are interested in the best interests of children, I think it's really, really important to kindly talk to parents about the use of physical abuse on children and why they do that and what the meaning of that is. So kind of understanding why physical abuse happens and why people choose to use physical chastisement. And I know there's kind of lots of cultural arguments regarding that, but we don't know by looking whether adults use physical abuse to harm, humiliate, or discipline, or help children learn a lesson. So kind of think about the context in which physical abuse is being used. I think it's really, really important to remember that into adolescence, that we have adolescents who have been harmed but may go on to be people who harm others. So high levels of bullying for adolescents who've been harmed, harmful sexual behaviours, sibling sexual abuse, and really, really important that we take those seriously. I'm not really going to talk about those today, but we are seeing sexual abuse and violence in adolescence as kind of being another impact of those early neglect. So what gets in the way kind of creating change here? So I think the first thing is to kind of think about professional responses to adolescents, that we need to think about what adolescents evoke in us. And another review I did the review for the 2 girls who murdered the vulnerable adult up in the northeast a couple of years ago. And they were adolescents who'd had long histories. Well, one had long history of harm, the other had a recent history of neglect and harm. But what kind of characterised both of them is that professionals didn't really like them. There was something about these girls that kind of evoked quite strong negative feelings. And consequently, professionals tended to collude with parents about there being something wrong with the 2 girls rather than thinking that they were being harmed. So think about kind of how adolescents make you feel and using supervision to kind of think about those responses. What's really, really critical if you think about the importance of attachment and relationship is that we don't have too many people and too many processes involved in adolescence. So when I'm doing serious case reviews for adolescents, what I really notice is that we tend, because it's so complex and so difficult, adolescent neglect, we do tend to throw everything at it, and you find that adolescents have maybe 12, 14, 16 professionals and processes and groups and support mechanisms going into them. It's absolutely impossible for an adolescent to cope with that many different people, partly because of your kind of sense of not being able to trust everybody, but also kind of building attachment relationships that you haven't had previously is time consuming, and you need to concentrate on the ones that are important. So let's try and think about consolidating the number of people in an adolescent's life. And then there's the whole kind of process of adultification, and thinking about who we see before you. There was a review done last year for a boy who, aged 13, was living in Bournemouth in a flat on his own, and was found by the police with a kind of huge stash of drugs. He was a young black boy of 13, but actually he was 6'2", and what the police saw before them was not a child but an adult, and they treated him as an adult. So also thinking, actually, who is adultification, difficult to say, is a quite important process. So do we see some young women dressed in particular clothes with makeup on, kind of demonstrating their kind of individuality? Do we see them as adults, as young adults, because of the way that they look? And can we forget that they are children? And actually needing to challenge that in ourselves. So I'm going to show you a final video, and this clip is really, really hard, and I'm showing it to you because it's a young woman who grew up in difficult circumstances, and it's her story. She's telling us her story, and there's just something about, I'm wanting us to focus on the use of language, this issue of adaptation, this issue of signs of damage, and how we characterize adolescence as individually difficult rather than having a context in which they live, which is difficult. So the kind of internal world, as opposed to the kind of external circumstances, and how easy it is to get muddled between the two. So again, I'm going to have to stop the sharing, and I'm going to include system video, and I'm going to go to the final one. You're still there, aren't you?
Personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. I'm unstable. It says it there in black and white. It sits next to your name on records. It tells the world I'm not to be trusted, that anything I do and say is disordered. Personality, meaning my whole being, is disordered. Disordered meaning wrong. Medical notes, occupational health reports to employers, benefits, insurance, there for everyone to see. Get in the car, get on your knees, get on the bed, tell me you love it. Meet me at 8. We're going for a drive. Stay silent in the car. We have a few places to take you. Don't scream. Here, take this pill. Drink this alcohol. We've got to loosen you up for your big night ahead. Take your clothes off. Do you want me to have to use this knife on you? Can you feel my hands around your neck? Can you feel my hands touching your body? Can you hear them all waiting to come and see you, have their turn? Don't pull on your gag, don't remove your blindfold, and don't try and struggle with the ropes around your wrists. We will kill you, we will burn your house down. We will make sure no one ever finds your body. Shut up, bitch, you're worthless, you're a slut, you're a little slag, no one will believe you. You are ours, you're our play toy. Jamie, pass us your beer bottle. Let's see how she squirms when we use it on her. Let's see how many men she can take till her body bleeds. Let's see how much of her innocence and childhood we can take away. Let's see how much damage we can do to her body beyond repair. Let's see how many men we can get to rape her, or how many places in the country we can take her. Oh, she's pregnant. Well, we'll sort that. We'll give her some botched abortions. Let's lock her in that room for days for the men to come and visit. She doesn't need food or water. Tied to a bed, naked, in a boarded up room, will do. Hi, Sally. Welcome to Mental Health Services. I see you have tried to take your own life. What did you want to happen? Are you an attention seeker? Are you looking for attention? You have a personality disorder. You have lived a reckless lifestyle and your coping mechanisms aren't appropriate. This will stay on the record for the rest of your life and there is nothing you can do about it. If you try to complain, your disorder will be used against you because you're unreliable. I see you like to have relationships with older men. Do you realise how reckless your actions are? This is part of your disorder. I can see on your notes you have been abused, but why are you trying to talk to professionals about your sex life, Sally? I'm a mental health nurse. This is not appropriate to discuss. You engage in inappropriate conversations about your intimate life, and that oversteps boundaries. You need to learn skills to behave appropriately. You need DBT, you self-harm, you behave recklessly, you present inappropriate coping mechanisms. DBT is the only answer. You need to face your behaviour choices and change it. Here's the address to a group to attend. Sally, why haven't you been going to DBT? It says here that you have said it's because it's near an address you were allegedly abused at. That's not good enough. You need to get over this. If you don't do DBT, you are treatment resistant. You are not engaging. Here's some medication. They're antipsychotics. They will help numb you and block out all the memories. We can't offer you therapy. You are too unstable. You need to forget about the past and learn to move on. You are being sent 200 miles away to a secure unit in London. You kicked a male member of staff after they restrained you when you were upset. You are violent. You are aggressive. You are not trying hard enough. Hi, Sally. It's the police. You're not a credible witness. A jury would not believe you. Your mental health means they'll say you are a liar. Your issues with dissociation means they'll say you imagined it. Your history of self-harm and suicide attempts confirm you're unstable. Who's going to believe someone who's unstable? I mean, did you get into their car because you love the thrill? People with your diagnosis love the drama. People with your diagnosis like hurting themselves. Was this just a form of self-harm? You're an attention seeker. All borderlines are. They make up lies for attention. Are you a prostitute? People who are unstable have unstable relationships. Did you become just beyond your depth? Stop crying. Stop being hysterical. We will have to section you where doctors can deal with your mental illness. You have been raped. You need to tell us details. This has happened before though, hasn't it, Sally? And you just have us running around in circles. You need to be in long-term psychiatric help to sort out your issues. If you don't like it, Sally, just say no. Walk away from them. You don't meet up with them. Do you like putting yourself in danger? Is this part of your disorder? We see many like you who are mentally ill and just love the thrill of danger. Your case will not stand up in court. Your mental health sees you as an unreliable witness. You will never get justice with a personality disorder. Hi, Sally. I'm your abusive friend. Gosh, you've always not been right in the head, have you? You're way too sensitive. I'm going to be hard on you because you need to learn not to be so sensitive. You are so negative. I don't need negativity in my life. You need to think positively and move on. Yeah, but you fit all the criteria for BPD. Why can't you just accept that you have it? Sally, how can you say a personality disorder doesn't exist when there's specialist hospitals and services all over the world with people in them? I work with people with PD and many of them are just in denial about their disorder. You just must be the same. You're always using your past abuse as an excuse. You're always playing victim. I never do anything wrong. It's just you interpreting that I do. Because you've got a personality disorder. I'm headstrong because I don't suffer from depression anymore. Maybe you'd need to learn to just be stronger. Why is no one listening to me? Am I really that worthless? Did I lead them on? Did I let them abuse me? I am mental. I am disordered. I am unstable. I am going mad. It's all my fault. I am messed up. I don't deserve help. No one cares about me. Did I like what they did to me? Do I like the attention? Am I an attention seeker? I'm dramatic. I am fucked up and disordered. My mind is broken. I'm a slag. I'm disgusting. I am dirty. I am such a letdown. I am crazy, unstable person and I hate myself. Hi, Sally. Wow, what you've been through is massive. This wasn't okay. There is nothing wrong with you or your personality. Saying your personality is disordered protects the actions of your abusers. You were a child. This wasn't your responsibility to stop them. Your mind has experienced severe trauma. Of course you're going to struggle to cope. I completely understand why life feels unbearable and you want to die. This should never have happened to you. Let's use this time now to talk through what happened. This is a safe space. You can be as open and as truthful and honest as you need to be. No filters. Because this is your truth. I want to hear about Sally. I want to hear about who she is and what happened to her. We can find a way to work through this and find a safe and successful path to follow for her future. But it will take time. I see you as a person, not a set of symptoms or a disorder. How can you possibly move on if you've not had the chance to come to terms and explore what happened? Life is going to be hard. And you deserve support. You are not violent. You reacted to someone restraining you and it's understandable. And being locked up and stuffed in hospital just mirrors being locked in a room you were abused in, doesn't it? Who wouldn't want to go back to a street they were horrifically abused at to do DBT? Your mind and body is reacting to things a mind and body should never have to experience. I see so many positives in you, Sally. You fought so hard to build a life, a future. You help others and you are sensitive to others' feelings. I believe you.
So I think really important to show you that video. It's a very tough one from Sally Ann actually, but she just reminds us of the importance of language and thinking about how easily adolescents who are being harmed, have been harmed, are labelled. And I'm just going to pick up a few of the things that the words she used, which I see quite often recorded in files. So she used the word attention seeker. Is she really an attention seeker, or is she someone who needs an attachment relationship? Is she looking for an attachment relationship? She behaved recklessly, or did someone take advantage of her normal adolescent risky behaviour? Is she always playing victim? Is she promiscuous? Is she and the word slag? So I think really thinking about language is really important here around adolescence and challenging the kind of ongoing demonisation of young people who've been harmed. And we're going to talk after the break more closely about neglect, but just thinking about I think we've all got much better at thinking about language, but I still come across records where these phrases, attention seeking, promiscuous, putting herself at risk, damaged, all of those phrases are used. And I often joke that I'm going to go and break into various offices and change all the records in local authorities. But I think I'd really encourage you to think about other people who write reports and records that you get from other people, and let's start challenging that narrative. Just thinking about some of the records that exist for children and young people, what would happen if they went back and read them. There's a really good book by Lem Sissy, who went back and looked at all his records, same with Hackney Child, and the things that they found there written about them, and they would be forgiven for thinking that there was something wrong with them rather than something being done to them. And that's the kind of message going into the break, really, is that when we're thinking about adolescents who are in difficulty, we're thinking about the context, what's the context behind those difficulties, what's happened to them rather than what's wrong with them. And Sally Ann, I think I used her, that the last bit she talked about, which is where what she's saying is an alternative way of approaching her, acknowledging all the powerfulness of what she's been through, and actually kind of starting to see that as a strength is really important. I've used that sort of last bit in my Safeguarding Adult review, which I started with, and just sort of to finish on that is in Emma, my Safeguarding Adult review, you know, at the age of 6, she was written that she came into care because she was too difficult for her mum to cope with, not that she was being neglected and needed alternative caregiving. And that kind of too difficult to cope with, too damaged, travelled with her all the way through her life, into her sort of psychiatric records in young adulthood, and something she herself would tell people when she came into contact with them. That's my history. I was too difficult to be parented, and that's why I have no attachments or relationships.